We're here to take those complex topics and, well, make them make sense, hopefully giving you a few aha moments along the way. Today, we are diving deep into something so many people experience: chronic pain. You know, that initial pain, like touching something hot, that's one thing. An alarm bell.
Right, instant warning.
But chronic pain, that's a whole different beast, and that's what we want to get to the bottom of today.
Exactly. We're moving beyond just that immediate sensation. We're exploring how pain, when it sticks around, actually seems to change how the brain handles it.
Yeah, it's like it stops being purely about the physical feeling.
It gets tangled up with our emotions, our motivations. The brain's priorities seem to shift.
Precisely. And we've got a great guide for this, a review article looking right at emotional and motivational pain processing. It pulls together human studies, animal studies, the works.
Gives us a broader picture.
Right. So our mission, if you will, is to understand why. Why does chronic pain feel so different from acute pain, and what's actually happening inside the brain to cause that?
And it's such a crucial distinction. Acute pain is protective.
Right.
It tells you, stop that, pull your hand away. It's adaptive.
Makes perfect sense. Keeps you safe.
But chronic pain, that's where those same responses, the fear, the avoidance, they can become, well, they stop being helpful.
They kind of go off the rails.
Yeah, they can actually impair function, lead to social withdrawal, anxiety, depression, all those things we unfortunately see linked with chronic pain.
So that's the central question for this deep dive, isn't it? What flips that switch? Why does the brain start processing chronic pain through this much more negative emotional and motivational lens?
Let's unpack that whole idea of an emotional motivational shift. Pain's definition itself is key here. It's defined as both sensory and emotional.
Right. It's not just a physical thing on paper. And we know the overlap, the comorbidity between chronic pain and things like depression and anxiety is, well, it's really high.
Super high. And the hypothesis we're exploring is that maybe this isn't just a correlation. Maybe in chronic pain, the brain actually starts prioritizing negative emotional information processing.
And that could be why we see so many emotional and motivational issues alongside the pain itself.
It represents a real shift in pain research, too. For ages, the focus was almost solely on nociception, the sensory detection of harm.
Just the wiring, basically.
Kind of, yeah. But now there's this growing understanding of how deeply emotion and motivation are woven into the whole experience of persistent pain.
It becomes this constant background stressor.
A huge stressor, exactly. And a motivator, but often in unhelpful ways. It can drive maladaptive fear, anxiety, avoidance. It's not just about the injury signal anymore.
It's about how that signal messes with everything else.
Yeah, how it interacts with our reward systems, how we learn, how we regulate our goals, even basic approach avoidance behaviors. It can really throw a wrench in the works.
So how do researchers even study this? It sounds incredibly complex.
It is complex. And the review points out the strengths of different approaches. Human studies are great because you can ask people directly about their experience, their feelings, their goals.
You get the subjective side.
Exactly. But animal models let you dig into the underlying neurobiology, the circuits, the molecules, in ways you just can't in humans.
So you need both.
Ideally, yes. The real power comes from translational research, connecting the dots between what we see in humans and the mechanisms we uncover in animal studies.
Okay, let's get into some of those human studies then. Goal regulation. That seems fundamental. We're all trying to achieve things.
Right. And ongoing pain can feel like this massive roadblock to the things we value, whether it's work, hobbies, or just family time.
It must be incredibly frustrating.
Hugely. And self-regulation theories help us understand this. They look at how we manage ourselves, our thoughts, feelings, actions to reach our goals. Pain creates this gap, this negative state that we naturally try to manage.
So at first, maybe someone with persistent pain just tries to push through. Keep aiming for those goals they had before the pain.
Often, yes. The research mentions cognitive shielding, this real mental effort to stay focused on the goal and kind of block out the pain.
Sounds exhausting.
It is.
Yeah.
And if those efforts keep failing, if the pain constantly wins, there can be a motivational shift towards pain itself. Pain-related goals, like trying to control the pain, trying to get relief, can become the main focus.
Yeah.
You see increased problem-solving attempts directed at the pain, more avoidance.
Which makes sense on one level, but I can see how that could become a trap, focusing so much on the pain, on the negative.
Exactly. It can narrow your focus, bias you towards negative information, and eventually lead to feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, even depression and anhedonia, that inability to feel pleasure.
That sounds bleak. Is there an alternative?
Well, the review also discusses something called goal disengagement, which can actually be adaptive.
Disengagement, like giving up.
Not necessarily in a negative way. It's more about recognizing when a goal is persistently blocked, maybe reevaluating its importance right now, accepting the situation, and becoming more open to alternative feasible goals.
Ah, okay. So it's about flexibility, finding a different path rather than just banging your head against a wall.
Precisely. It involves broadening your intentional focus again, away from just the pain.
That's really interesting. Okay, what about reward processing? We all like rewards. How does that fit in with pain?
Well, there's this intriguing idea of a sort of hedonic continuum, with pain at one end and pleasure or reward at the other, maybe linked by emotion.
So they're not totally separate.
Perhaps not. And there's evidence that pleasant experiences, good smells, nice music, even getting money can actually reduce acute pain.
Makes sense. Distraction, maybe?
Possibly. But it might be more than that. And pain relief itself. That's a very powerful reward, especially for someone in chronic pain.
I can imagine. It becomes the ultimate goal.
Right. And the research suggests this relief does more than just physically reduce the pain signal. It seems to trigger the body's own endogenous pain inhibition systems.
Like your own internal painkillers.
Exactly. And interestingly, the brain areas involved in processing pain and reward show significant overlap. Dopamine, the key reward chemical, seems crucial here.
How so?
It looks like dopamine mediates reward-induced pain inhibition, but it might also be involved in punishment-induced pain facilitation, so it's central to that interplay.
There's a fascinating study mentioned about teenagers. Something about their reward response predicting later pain.
Yes, that was striking.
Yeah.
How strongly certain brain regions responded to rewards at age 14 predicted pain complaints later in adolescence. And the effect was stronger for kids with a specific gene variant related to opioid receptors.
Wow. So our individual reward system wiring might influence our vulnerability to pain later on?
It's a possibility, yeah. Looking closer at the brain, the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC, seems important for mediating how rewards inhibit pain. It does this by changing its functional connectivity, how it talks to other brain regions.
And there's a push and pull, right? Something about the insula.
Right. Increased activity in the insula, another area involved in emotion and bodily states, was linked to people prioritizing pain avoidance, even over getting money. And this bias was related to activity in that OFC.
It's like a competition in the brain. Avoid pain or get reward.
Sort of. And then you have areas like the nucleus accumbens and the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, which become more active during pain relief.
The ACC. Rings a bell. Opioids.
Exactly. The ACC is rich in opioid receptors. The thinking is that opioidergic mechanisms, using the body's natural opioids in the ACC, are related to that rewarding feeling of pain relief.
And they've seen this in humans.
Yes. Human PET studies have shown an association between opioid receptor activation in the ACC and how much pain reduction people perceive from a placebo.
That's amazing. Just the expectation of relief triggering that reward system.
It really highlights the power of the brain's reward and expectation systems in modulating the pain experience.
Okay, let's shift to learning. How does past experience shape current pain?
Oh, significantly. Operant learning through rewards and consequences can definitely affect pain perception. Even subtle feedback can change reported pain levels.
Really?
Yeah, and remarkably, studies show it can even alter objective measures like brain potentials and facial expressions associated with pain.
Wow, and pain relief itself is the reinforcer.
It's a powerful, intrinsic reinforcer. Studies show that even partial relief can lead to learned changes in pain perception in both humans and animals. It trains the brain in a way.
What about the flip side? Fear learning.
That's a huge factor in chronic pain. If you learn to associate certain movements or situations with pain, it can really ramp things up.
Yeah.
It can lead to sensitization, lower pain thresholds, make it harder to habituate or get used to pain, bias your attention towards painful areas, and even impair your ability to discriminate between different sensations.
It sounds like it puts the brain on high alert for pain.
Very much so. And this learned fear, this pain-related fear conditioning, can also increase things like muscle tension, which can then feed back into the pain cycle.
Vicious cycle.
Absolutely. And the avoidance behavior that comes from fear learning is tricky. By avoiding the feared movement or activity, you never get the chance to learn that maybe it's not harmful anymore, or not as harmful as you fear.
So it prevents relearning, prevents recovery.
It can definitely delay it, yeah. It maintains the fear.
So looking specifically at people living with chronic pain, it sounds like this really disrupts their everyday life, their goals, their choices.
It absolutely does. They face this constant, difficult balancing act. How much pain is worth enduring to do something valued versus how much should they withdraw to avoid pain?
And sometimes the avoidance wins out.
Often, yes. Pain relief can become the dominant overarching goal, overshadowing other previously valued activities and life goals.
And you mentioned they get sort of stuck trying to control the pain.
That's a common pattern.
Yeah.
Stuck in attempts to control or eliminate the pain, leading to this chronic vigilance, always scanning for pain-related information or potential threats.
And research backs this up.
Yes, studies show chronic pain patients often prioritize pain control goals, sometimes seeing it as a necessary first step before any other goal can be pursued. And there's lots of evidence for that biased attention towards pain cues we talked about.
It's like their world shrinks down to focus on the pain.
It can feel that way. And interestingly, a really strong focus on actively solving the pain problem is often associated with more catastrophic thinking about the pain, and paradoxically, even greater attention to the pain.
Wow. Okay, let's bring in the animal studies now. We get the human experience, but what about the brain mechanisms underneath?
Right. There's a growing awareness in animal research that we need to look beyond just reflexive pain responses and evaluate these effective motivational aspects too.
How do they do that?
Well, they've identified the corticolimbic circuitry connections between the cortex, the thinking part, and the limbic system, the emotional part, as being critical.
For both types of pain?
Yes, for processing both acute and chronic pain, but also for evaluating goals, making decisions about avoidance, coping strategies. It's a central hub.
And the reward system is part of this. Dopamine.
Absolutely. The mesolimbic reward pathway, dopamine neurons in the VTA, projecting to the nucleus accumbens, that's usually linked to pleasure, motivation, drugs of abuse.
But it's involved in pain, too.
It seems so, and in complex ways.
Yeah.
It used to be thought aversive things just shut dopamine down, but newer techniques show a more nuanced picture.
Like what?
Like using fast-scan cyclic voltammetry to measure dopamine release in real time. These studies find dopamine increases in some areas, like the dorsal striatum and nucleus accumbens core during pain, maybe coding its importance or salience.
But not everywhere.
Right. In other areas, like the nucleus accumbens shell, dopamine might be suppressed during pain, but then increase after the pain stops, possibly signaling relief.
Interesting. So dopamine signals both the badness and the relief from badness.
It seems to be involved in processing the significance of both, yes. And then you have studies like conditioned place preference, CPP.
Where the animal learns to like a place.
Exactly. If giving an animal with an injury a non-opioid pain reliever makes them feel better, they'll learn to prefer the place where they got that relief. This only happens in injured animals, not controls.
So it shows they're motivated to seek relief.
Precisely. And crucially, this CPP effect is linked with dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens and can be blocked by dopamine antagonists. It really ties that motivation for pain relief to the brain's reward circuitry.
So relief is inherently rewarding, biologically. What about the unpleasant side, the aversion, in animals?
The prefrontal cortex, or PFC, is key there. That's the brain's executive control center, decision-making, emotion regulation, cognition, and it's heavily involved in pain.
How does it control pain?
It exerts top-down control over both the sensory and the affective, the emotional dimensions of pain. And it's highly connected to reward circuits, the amygdala, emotion center, the hippocampus, memory center.
Does the whole PFC do the same thing?
No. Animal studies suggest different subregions have distinct roles. For example, in rodents, the ACC might enhance the interaction between pain and anxiety. The prelimbic cortex, or PL, might actually become inhibited during chronic pain. And again, opioid circuits within the ACC seem important for pain relief.
And the connections to emotion and memory areas, amygdala, hippocampus.
Those are crucial. They're involved in emotional memories, fear conditioning, and in animal models of neuropathic pain, researchers see changes, plasticity in the connections within and between these areas and the PFC.
So the wiring actually changes.
It seems so. The PFC can also modulate inhibitory cells within the amygdala, giving it another way to influence emotional processing related to pain. It's a really dynamic network.
Okay, so we have this complex network. The big question remains, how does it all go wrong in the transition from acute to chronic pain?
That's the frontier, really.
Yeah.
Most animal pain studies used to be quite short-term, looking at acute effects. But more recently, researchers are extending the time frame, looking weeks or months after an injury.
To see that shift happen.
Exactly. And they are seeing things. For instance, studies in rats show anxiety-like behaviors emerging months after a nerve injury. And this coincides with measurable volumetric changes in the PFC. the structure changes.
Wow. And at the molecular level.
There too. Findings include reduced expression of genes for dopamine receptors and kappa opioid receptors in the nucleus accumbens at later time points, coinciding with altered functional connectivity between brain regions.
So the communication changes too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And fMRI studies in animals have linked activity patterns in the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal areas, specifically to tactile allodynia, that pain from light touch, but mainly at the later chronic stage.
So the picture emerging from animal models is one of actual brain reorganization during that transition phase.
Definitely. These preclinical studies are starting to identify potential molecular underpinnings for that shift towards emotional and motivational pain processing.
Which brings us to the crucial step, translation. Taking this knowledge from animal models and using it to help people, how does that work? What are the hurdles?
Well, animal research offers clear advantages. You can do invasive studies, control genetics and environment, have homogeneous populations, things you can't easily do in humans.
More control.
Right. And there have been major successes. The discovery of those descending opioid-sensitive pain-controlled pathways in animals directly led to treatments like deep brain stimulation of pain in humans for pain relief.
That's a fantastic example of translation.
It is, but there are significant limitations too. Animal models just can't fully capture the complexity of human pain, especially the subjective emotional experience, the suffering component.
How do you know if a rat is feeling hopeless, right?
Exactly. It's incredibly challenging to assess those internal emotional states directly. Researchers use behavioral tests as proxies, like the open field test for anxiety, FORSWIM for despair, those CPP or conditioned place avoidance tests for motivation.
But they're indirect measures.
They are useful, but indirect. Things like the PP test, pain elicited escape avoidance paradigm, try to get closer to measuring motivation to avoid pain, but it's still not the same as asking a person.
So the challenge is bridging that gap more effectively.
Precisely. We need better correlation between human and animal findings to confidently identify therapeutic targets that will actually work in the complex reality of human chronic pain.
Makes sense. Find the common ground.
Yeah, combining the mechanistic detail from animals with the rich subjective data from humans, that's the path forward for developing better treatments.
So let's try to wrap this up. The big takeaway seems to be that chronic pain is way more than just a sensation that won't quit.
Absolutely. It involves this fundamental shift in brain processing towards negative emotions and altered motivations.
It affects our goals, how we experience reward, how we learn.
Yeah.
It touches so many core aspects of being human.
And the brain circuits involved, especially these corticolimbic pathways using dopamine and opioids, are right at the heart of this transition.
Animal research is giving us vital clues about the nuts and bolts, the neurobiology driving this shift.
Which is crucial. Understanding those mechanisms is our best hope for finding new ways to intervene and help people break free from the cycle of chronic pain.
It really hammers home that chronic pain changes the brain, changes how it values things, changes what drives us.
It really does. Which leads to maybe a final thought for our listeners.
Go for it.
Given this deep interplay we've discussed between pain, emotion, and motivation, how might consciously understanding your own goals, your own personal reward systems, influence your experience of pain or how you manage it? What if focusing, even intentionally, on activities and goals that bring you meaning and a sense of reward? Even small ones could be a powerful, maybe overlooked tool for coping with persistent discomfort. Something to think about.